Hello everyone, welcome to So Janelle. I'm your host, Janelle So. The last few days have been very difficult to understand. If you're like me, a Filipino immigrant who have no history of Black history, no knowledge, no understanding, it is even more difficult for people like us to understand what's going on, to feel and appreciate the depth of the anguish and the fear and the rage and the outrage that's happening within the community of our Black brothers and sisters, as well as standing in solidarity and being allies of the community. And I know that this is something that some of our brothers and sisters who are Filipino-Americans have an understanding of, and I know that in these times we turn to them for education. This show, we had planned something else for this Sunday. The economy was beginning to open up and we wanted to do a show about that, but we had to pivot and talk about this very important topic, because as you will see in our interview, the Black community is closely related to the Filipino-American community. The fight is not by race, because we're both fighting social injustices. Racism is a social injustice, police brutality, mistreatment, and some inequality is a fight not just unique to the African Americans, but also to us Filipino Americans. And so we have to be involved. But being involved is not just the way we want to be involved. It's not just saying things that we want to say. As I have learned from personal experience, being involved means also educating ourselves so we understand what's going on, the context of why things are happening, and so that we can make culturally sensitive statements when we do speak up and speak out about the issue. And that's what we're here for today on the show. We're going to be talking to a professor, Filipino-American professor, retired professor, who will explain to us what this is about, the gravity of the issue, why we need to care, and what we can do. Joining us this afternoon to help us understand everything that's going on right now with this Black Lives Matter and how it relates to the Filipino-American community is retired Professor Carol Ojeda-Kimbrough, who taught the Filipino-American experience, Asian women or Asian American women, and Asian American studies in several universities here in Southern California. Professor Kimbrough, hello and welcome to the show.
Hi, Janelle. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for coming out of retirement to actually talk to us today. We need guidance in understanding what's going on. We are Filipinos. We have our own issues. Just recently, we were faced with a fight against xenophobia. Now we have this Black Lives Matter movement. Should we take this on as our fight? Should we stand in solidarity, or should we push for allyship? What's the difference?
First of all, tama, we have our own issues. Immigration is at the top of this. And then the other thing is the COVID-19, the pandemic. And then you mentioned the Black Lives Matter. And I would add racism and police brutality. Their fight is our fight. So we stand in solidarity with our African American brothers and sisters. So these are issues that we should all be concerned about because it affects all of us. But let me also be clear that it impacts certain communities more so than others. And in this case of heightened police aggression towards minorities, our Black brothers and sisters are disproportionately targeted. So where do we stand?
Yes.
We stand in solidarity with the African American community because we recognize that this is also our fight. An attack on one is an attack on all of us. That's what we said when Joseph Ileto was murdered by a white supremacist. This is what we should be saying with the murders of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and the list of names go on. And you wanted to know if there's a difference between being an ally and standing in solidarity. The terms are used interchangeably, ally referring to people who are not part of a marginalized group, that they have more privilege, they're in a position of power, and sometimes they're able to use that position of power and privilege to support social movements for equality and justice. Hindi tayo yun. Pero it would be insulting if we just dismiss that,
For myself, and I speak maybe for a lot of our viewers and followers, as a Filipino immigrant, I moved here in my 20s. I admit that I do not know about Black history. And many immigrants do not, obviously, because we have our own problems of racism. What should we know and keep in mind now when speaking up on this issue?
Usually, we study history to understand our past. So we don't repeat mistakes of the past, to provide context for our present and to help us in decision making. But we have to ask certain questions, when we study history. Who writes it? For what purpose? Whose history are we talking about? And more importantly, what's missing? We should keep this in mind when speaking up on the issue, that we don't know the history. Sabi nga nila, engage the brain before operating the mouth. Generally, people make opinions without knowing the context of their comments. And I know you've received a lot of flack for one of your posts, especially because of I guess the picture that was in there where it says calm down. And I really want to acknowledge your post this morning. I read it where you offered your apologies, your sincere apologies for that earlier post. And I appreciate where you're coming from. And that's what I mean about knowing the context before making a generalized opinion. Sabi mo nga, educate, educate, educate.
So, like myself, for instance, I said something and I was corrected, and I did admit, and I took it as a challenge. But not everyone is going to do that. Not all the viewers are, first of all, going to be open, and secondly, to the correction, because the knee-jerk reaction is to defend and be defensive. Do we then just say, oh, I don't know anything about it, let's just not bother?
Well, if we're going to stop doing or saying anything because we're afraid of what people will say, then how can we learn, di ba?
Yes.
So it's also a question of if we're open to having a discussion, then we're open to learning.
One thing, though, that's common is what's happening now, our president's reaction to it, deploying the military. And now there are curfews because of these protests. And we feel like we've been here before in the Philippines during the Marcos regime, which is martial law. And I want to get your opinion on what you think is going to happen as an activist during that time as well. When we return on the show, don't go away.
The coronavirus pandemic has forced everyone to consider ways they can squeeze more out of their budget. It'd still be so easy to get through this uncertain time, though, if you consider some of these simple ideas. Go online to a local library. You can save significantly by renting a book or even a movie. Libraries also host free events, seminars, and even educational classes, even online. Identify what impacts your budget the most. For many, it's food. Consider purchasing only essentials or avoid premium grocery stores. Discount shopping can be a trap too, and that is equally true now with virtually all shopping being done online. Whether it's cable or online subscriptions, cut extra bills you don't need. Also, see if some of the services you use will pause payments if they are closed or unavailable, such as the gym. Increase your disposable income by paying off high-interest credit cards. It can be stressful to have to look for ways to tighten your budget, but it is possible to make some simple adjustments that will still allow you to be comfortable.
There is justified horror over the looting, over the destruction, over the violence, over the burning, our cities, our homes burning. But there's also justified rage and outrage over the death of George Floyd. And also, it's not just him. He represents a list of African-American men and women that have died, lost their lives in the hands of law enforcement. And that is the crux of the issue. And that is what our African-American brothers and sisters are fighting for. And that is why we need to stand in solidarity with them. If we want to be allies, we can do that. But we need to educate ourselves first to understand what they're going through, to understand the issue before we can even do anything. What happens after this is the future of our nation, our society, and if we have children, that is the future of our children. Talking to Professor Carol Ojeda-Kimbrough today on the show as an organizer, activist from the martial law era of the Marcos regime in the Philippines. I wasn't an activist, but I know Philippine history and I can sense some similarities. So from your end, what similarities and differences can you draw with how the Trump administration is handling this unrest?
This happened such a long time ago, pero martial law. You would see, if you were there, you'd see the presence of the military everywhere. Curfew, that's what's happening now. The writ of habeas corpus was suspended, meaning you can just be blocked out. People will not know where you are. The issue of salvaging or extrajudicial killing for anyone who's suspected of being an activist or communist or terrorist, people would just disappear. Dito, that's not quite there yet, but that's why we're having these protests. It's because of the killings of African American men, women, and some are actually children, and they're being killed on the basis of one thing: the color of their skin. And Trump is trying to send the military. He's calling governors as weak because they're trying to work with the protesters. But all he wants to do is send the military and exercise fascist tactics.
Is this a move towards hijacking the November 2020 election? I'm saying this because, in my opinion, just observing, I'm thinking that he's really not doing anything because he wants an excuse. He wants protesters to be more violent, to destroy more, so that he has a reason to use military action, military force, and that it extends until November, during the November 2020 election.
This is just my opinion also. So, and I could be wrong on this, but this is what we're observing, is that Trump uses all sorts of distractions to avoid the issues, to avoid addressing the issues. So when the pandemic started, he came up with all sorts of things. Blatant lies even. And then now this with the protesters who are willing actually to risk their lives by being out there. And I don't mean being shot, but also being exposed to the COVID-19. When people take that risk, there's something really, really wrong with what's happening in our country. Possibly a move towards hijacking the election. He started by trying to get rid of the post office, by saying that voting by mail is would lead to rampant cheating and all that. Republicans and Democrats can vote by mail. So what is he afraid of? He's afraid of losing. With things that are going on, people are getting really upset, especially the elderly, people who who has a propensity to vote.
We're going to be continuing this conversation on YouTube. Please join us there, www.youtube.com/Sojanel. We have our live premieres on Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Pacific, that's 11 p.m. Eastern, and 11 a.m. Manila, that's Thursday morning, for those friends and loved ones of yours who in the Philippines who want to know what's going on here in America. For now, we will be back with more on the show. Don't go away. Today, still talking to Professor Carol Ojeda-Kimbrough, trying to make sense of where we stand as Filipino-Americans in this movement of Black Lives Matter. And so far, she's been very helpful in explaining to us why we should care, why their fight is our fight, because it's the same social injustices that we're fighting against. The feeling of martial law repeating in this administration of Trump. Obviously, a lot of Filipinos are familiar with martial law from the Marcos regime in the Philippines. Now, taking all that in, what can we do? What should we do?
Janelle, I'm tired. I've been doing this since, oh my gosh, since I think I was 12, right? At first year high school, and then when I came here, I became involved in activism as well. Things seem to be going well, Pero eto na naman, this is happening again. And the thing is, people are quick to judge also na riots is wrong, rioting is wrong, looting is wrong. Yeah, pero I'm not justifying these actions, but I think we should focus on what the issue is, and that's police brutality. That's the murders of many of our African American brothers and sisters. During the civil rights movement, sabi ni Dr. Martin Luther King, riots is the voice of the unheard. So that should be the context of the protest. When we talk about Black Lives Matter and why there's all these protests, it reminded me of the poem by Philippine national artist Amado V. Hernandez about the repression of Filipinos by the Spanish colonizers. And the ending of the last stanza says, "May araw ding ang luha mo'y masasaid matutuyo. May araw ding sa luha, di na luha sa mata mo, namumugto. Ang dadaloy, kundi apoy, at apoy na kulay dugo. Samantalang ang dugo mo ay aserong kumukulo. Sisigaw ka ng buong giting sa liyab ng libong sulo, at ang lumang tanikalay lalagutin mo ng punglo." Violence is not what we want to do, but there comes a point when riots and violence it's like the ultimate choice. There's nothing else. Yeah, I would add, educate yourself and then pass on what you've learned. As a community, we have a multitude of voices and opinions. Finally, I just want to remind everyone about Joseph Ileto, is the U.S. postal worker who was killed by a white supremacist. He was a victim of a hate crime, but his family honored him by using his name. Join our struggle, educate and prevent hate, instill love, equality, and tolerance for others.
While we saw looting and violence and aggression and destruction the first few nights, the longer this goes, the more peaceful the protesters are that we're seeing, the more organized they are. How do you think will this play out? Will there be an end?
With this minority group of haters taking center stage, and I'm so glad that the protesters are there to counter that, and their numbers are greater. The numbers for peace and justice and equality is a lot greater than the number of these hate-filled groups of people.
Yeah. One can only hope that this continues and that come November we effect that change from top all the way down to city officials.
Yes, so protest is one way, electoral politics is the other. So people, please vote. And for those who still don't like Biden and would prefer Sanders, this is all I can say is, who would Bernie Sanders vote for? And I know the answer, and I think you do too. Kaya, please vote your conscience.
Right.
Thank you, Janelle.
Thank you so much for joining us, and mabuhay. A black man, George Floyd, was lost his life under the knee of a white police officer, and he's not just one. There's a long list of African Americans who have lost their lives in the hands of police officers because of police brutality, because of systemic injustice, and that is why people are out on the streets protesting, rightfully so. There is outrage, there is rage, there is indignance, there is just the depth of fear and the intense emotions that people are feeling right now. African American community, people of color, the white community, we're all in this together. A very important issue that we need to tackle, and that's what we've been talking about here on the show. But let's not forget that we are still in a pandemic, and as we reopen the society, what will that look like for us? This segment is being made possible by Southern California Toyota Dealers Association. We thank them for championing the nurses. We thank them for making this segment possible, providing information for us as we try to manage our lives during this pandemic. MJ Garcia Dia, President-elect of Philippine Nurses Association of America. Hello and welcome to Sojanel. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
For some of us who are hearing about PNA for the first time, can you tell us about your organization?
So PNAA was actually formed by 5 chapters, which are New York, New Jersey, Illinois, Michigan, and Central California in 1979. It was really a response to the growing need of issues and concerns of Filipino nurses here in the United States. The mission is really to uphold and foster a positive image and welfare of our members and promote professional excellence. So this way we could contribute to healthcare and society. So we do have a lot of programs for our members, from professional, educational, and training development programs, as well as trying to mentor our young nurses so they could be future leaders of our organization. So we have actually existed for over 40 years, and we celebrated this last year in Atlanta, Georgia. So it was really a great celebration, and we were so looking forward for this year, 2020, which was designated by the World Health Organization as the Year of the Nurse.
And this is important, what you're doing, because now we're realizing how much you nurses are really sacrificing, not just on the front lines. We have people like you in the administrative side of things, and you're able to really manage this pandemic. But how do you think these actions on the streets, people coming together to protest, to march, going to affect the COVID curve, and what are the chances of a spike?
That's really an environment where people are at risk and could be potentially exposed. We know that there are some people that might be asymptomatic and might not have the symptoms of COVID, but are functional like you and me. So the close proximity of people with each other, that's really a high risk situation, and people really need to recognize that.
How are you preparing for this?
It's so sad that we were so unprepared, because obviously it was something that we have not experienced, even for myself, who have been a nurse for over 35 years. But I think we learned so much from what happened. We know for sure that we need to equip ourselves structural-wise in preparing for PPEs for our nurses, and also educating the public on what COVID-19 is. We also need to start, so to speak, of reintegrating the new normal, trying to rethink how we should be keeping our staff and our patients safe. And from an administration perspective, how do we repurpose our spaces now moving forward, and really to anticipate all the events that had happened and make that as a lessons learned. So this way we could be flexible on how we try to convert spaces, especially for isolation spaces that we need, and also to cross-train our nurses so they're always prepared and they're ready to be on the front line, because majority of us, when it came to the point where we need to volunteer, some of our nurses who work in administration went to the front line and did that.
And that's why segments like this are very important, because we let the public know how much you guys as nurses sacrifice. What a fortuitous time, because I didn't even realize that this year was designated as the nurses year. So thank you for your dedication and for your service. As a parting shot, do you have any more reminders for us to think about, especially with what's going on?
I think we have to just keep ourselves mentally healthy. A lot of us have forgotten to really reflect on what our priorities. We need to recharge ourselves. We need to take care of ourselves, especially our nurses, because they have went through a tremendous amount of stress and burnout. This is the year of the nurse, of course. People consider us as heroes, but people also need to remember that it's not us who are heroes. It's everyone who contributed to make sure that we feel safe, and particularly our patients. So we look forward that we will remember this as something that kept our community together and kept all of us resilient.
Ending on a positive note there, thank you so much to MJ for all that you do with the Philippine nurses, all the nurses that are risking their lives on the front lines. Thank you for everything that you're doing. Also, thank you to Toyota for making this possible for us. This segment is brought to us by Toyota because they want to champion the nurses in our community working hard on the front lines. At the same time, they want to help us as the economy continues to reopen. Toyota is making it possible for us to get information on what is going on out there. And so when you need a vehicle, you can count on Trust Toyota to be there for you today and tomorrow. Right now, there's special low financing available on Prius, RAV4 Hybrid, and Camry Hybrid. Right now as well, you can get incredibly low financing on the entire Toyota Hybrid family. For amazing offers on a new Toyota Hybrid, shop online or see your local Toyota dealer. And I can attest to that. I drive a Highlander, a hybrid, saves on gas, smooth drive, and for somebody, a mom like me with 2 children, the size is just perfect. So make sure if you're looking for a new car, make sure you call or you shop online or you call your local Toyota dealer. For now, thank you so much for joining us on the show. Make sure you catch us on YouTube, www.youtube.com/sojanelle. Don't forget our live YouTube premieres on Wednesday nights, 8 p.m. Pacific, 11 p.m. Eastern, and 11 a.m. Manila time. Thank you so much for watching. Of course, don't forget our TV dates, same time, next week, same channel. I'm your host, Janelle So, and this has been So Janelle.